To Love a Dragon, Chapter 4. The sun rose gently over the horizon, lighting up the hills and valleys, and waking all the animals of the land. A week had passed since the interspecied lovers saw each other, and were wasting no time getting back to their point of rendezvous. Lillian had risen early in the morning to fish before leaving. A lake formed at the base of the mountain kingdom, and was plentiful in fish. She greeted the other dragons and the hatchlings playing by the lake. She dropped off a few fish to the hatchlings after having her fill and leaving. She never told anyone where she left to, and for good reason. It wasn't until Elder Ryu said anything that she thought anyone even wondered where she had left to. Park was riding his horse hard to get to the clearing where they would meet. He wasn't as fast as Lillian, and didn't have the luxury of stopping for breakfast before dawn. He would have to ride his horse the entire time until he arrived. Lillian had hunted while waiting for him in past meetings, having a meal waiting for him. He appreciated it, and she understood that he did not have the time to do so if he were to make it to her in good time. But she never minded anyhow. She loved to do things for him, as he did for her. Park slowed his horse as he came to the clearing. He hopped off and tied the horse to a stump that became a staple of where he kept the animal while he enjoyed his lover's company. Park finished tying the horse and turned.
"You're late, human."
Park smiled at the sight of his dragoness, a sight he would never tire from. He ran to her and they embraced. Lillian wasted no time and leaned forward and kissed Park.
"I have missed you so, Park. With the diminishing peace, I felt we would never be able to see each other again. My absence has been found out by one of the elders. I'm not sure what to do anymore."
Park gasped.
"Are you sure?"
"Yes. Elder Ryu approached me and explained that he knew. But he wasn't angry, only he..."
"What is it, Lillian?"
Lillian remained silent. Park wouldn't press on for an answer. He hated to see her this way, and would do nothing to make it worse. He saw a tear fall from her eyes. His heart ached, as if he had never seen her cry before.
"Lillian, no matter what, I will always love you. We will always find a way to be together."
"But this is serious, Park. If the other elders find out of this, they will stop at nothing to kill us both. I can't stop seeing you. I cannot live without you, nor could I see anything happen to you."
His dragoness looked sadly into his eyes.
"And what of your king? Or your superiors? Have they suspected anything?"
"Only Andre. I slip away when we are not patrolling or guarding the castle. Since my new duty of guard at the castle, getting away to come here has been easier. I've been using the ruse of my uncle being deathly ill and that I need to attend to him. No one has suspected much else."
Park said.
"Good.
Lillian replied.
The last thing we need is both our kingdoms finding out of this."
The two embraced again. Lillian nuzzled her muzzle into Park's neck. He held her close and swore silently that he would never let anything happen to her or their love. Lillian opened her eyes, a concerned look upon her face. She pulled back and looked at Park. Park stared back in question.
"Park, there is something else I need to tell."
"What is it, Lillian?"
Lillian hesitated for a moment. There was something else now. Something impossible. She wasn't sure how she would tell him, or even if she was sure about it.
"Park,
She stuttered.
I love you."
She thought to herself that she would save it for another time.
"And I love you, my beautiful
dragon."
The lovers at once turned to the hill above and set their eyes upon a man mounted on a horse. It was as if they had feared. They had been discovered. Lillian looked in horror at the man and turned to Park.
"Park, who is that?"
Park's eyes widened at the mounted figure.
Andre."
He whispered.
"Park! By the gods! What in the hell are you doing?"
The guard captain screamed in fury. Park didn't even need to answer. Andre had already figured it out. He saw the two embraced and had already witnessed their kiss.
"I'm disappointed in you, Park."
Andre spat.
I knew you had been sneaking away from your rounds and making stories to leave, but I thought it would have been for some maiden or bar wench, not with a goddamn dragon.
Park's eyes narrowed at Andre. He held his dragoness close, not knowing what would come of them. Andre controlled his anger and paced around the edge of the clearing.
The king will be most displeased when he learns of your treachery with this dragon temptress. Enjoy your time while you can with your scaled whore, for she will not be able to save your head from the executioner's axe. As for you, demon, do you know how many of your kind he and I have slain in battle? How many of your young still in their eggs, roasted over campfires to fill our bellies, while we mounted the heads of your elders on pikes to keep the flies away?
Lillian turned to Park.
Park, what is he talking about?
Still your lying tongue, Andre. I fought on the front line, but nothing more. Do not attempt to associate the atrocities you committed with me.
Park yelled back. Andre smiled through his brown-stained teeth and cracked lips.
It matters not, Park. You are still guilty of heresy, and you will still die for what you have done this day.
Lillian's eyes darted up.
Park, there are others.
Park noticed it too, as 2 units of archers approached from all corners of the clearing and took aim at the pair.
No!
Park howled. He stood up with his arms outstretched and shielded his dragoness.
Do with me what you will, but leave her.
Andre gritted his teeth.
You may have forgotten, Park, but we are at war with these beasts. While you are making a pact with the devil, I was still loyal to the king. It's time to bring this ruse of peace to an end.
Andre raised his hand to signal the archers to take aim at Lillian.
Stop!
Park yelled out. One archer let loose his arrow and aimed at the heart of the dragon. Park saw this and knew he could not see it happen. He dove in front of Lillian as the arrow pierced his shoulder through his armor.
Park! No!
Lillian screamed. The arrow flew with such ferocity that it knocked Park to the ground, hitting his head on a rock as he fell. Lillian ran to her human. She raised him up and held him close.
Park, wake up, please!
Lillian put her head to his. Tears streamed down her face as Andre and his assassins watched. Andre cracked a crooked smile.
Please, demon, do not cry for your whelp of a man. You will soon join him in hell.
Andre raised his arm again to signal the archers to ready. Lillian's eyes shut tightly, and her teeth clenched together. She laid Park down and trembled with rage. Her love was dead, and these humans would pay. Lillian stood up and clenched her fists, her claws digging into her palms. Blood ran freely from them as her anger built.
Take aim,
Andre commanded. Lillian's form began to change. Her arms snapped and cracked as they grew. Her claws on her feet and hands grew to talons the size of daggers. Her teeth shot forth, growing out of her mouth. Her horns twisted as spikes emerged from her tail. Her muzzle grew, new teeth shot forth as she dropped down to all fours. Her clothing stretched and tore as her frame expanded. Lillian opened her eyes. They were no longer the yellow-tinted beautiful orbs anyone had ever known. They had become blood red with vertical pupils. She was no longer Lillian, but the primal form of herself. Her mind was gone as her inner dragon came forth. With one last feat of power, she roared. A sound so terrifying the earth shook and the animals throughout the forest ran for cover. A chill of fear and horror ran down Andre's face. Mouth agape, he looked to his archers.
What are you waiting for, you fools? Kill her!
The archers let loose their arrows, the points aimed at some vital organ. The dragon saw the arrows and waited. Arrow after arrow bounced and cracked from the impact of her scales. She was not the same dragoness they saw before. This was true horror, and none of them would survive this day. The dragon looked for her first target. One archer sat in a tree, reaching for a second volley. She opened her mouth and released a fiery ball of death. The treetop and the archer exploded. She jumped out of the clearing and directly onto another archer, impaling him as she landed. Another archer drew his sword and charged the beast. Without even looking, one swipe from her tail severed his body in two at the waist. She sprang forth, grabbing another by his head, crushing his helmet and his head inside. Still clutching the dead human, she threw his body at one who started to run. She darted toward him as he fell and shot her claws through his chest from behind. Another archer fired with haste. Arrow after arrow bounced off her hide. Lillian leaped to him and pinned him underneath. She drew breath and sang her fiery song to him, melting his eyes and skin off, charring his skull. Most had run, but one she wanted was still there. Andre. She swung her head around and peered into his eyes.
You want me, bitch? Come and claim your kill!
He shouted as he ran. The dragon narrowed her eyes at him. She ran toward him, gaining ground as he fled. Andre dove behind a large bush, apparently hiding. She slowed her pace and walked toward his hiding place. Opening her mouth, she started to draw breath, ready to incinerate him. She would have her revenge on the man who caused Park's death. She would char his body and feast on his bones. As she prepared to volley, a sword swung out from behind, slightly slicing her back. The primal Lillian roared in pain, stopping the fire in her belly. Merely another archer trying to ambush her. She turned around, enraged. The human's face turned to dread as the dragon roared at him. Lillian stood up on her hind legs to tower over the terrified human. She lashed out with her talons, slicing his head and torso into strips. His body fell lifeless onto the ground as blood oozed from his mangled remains. Lillian's eyes widened, and her pupils dilated. No breath or roar could escape her jaws. She was frozen in place. She slowly crept her eyes down to see a bloody wooden spike emerging from her chest. She stumbled backward, holding the spike, turning around to see her killer. It was Andre. The bush where he seemed to be hiding was gone. The only thing it was hiding was a ballista. The giant crossbow was known to be able to kill dragons easily, including when they were in their beastly forms. Andre peered at her from behind the ballista, a savage grin upon his face. She stared at him, snarling. Lillian struggled to move. She struggled to breathe. With all her remaining strength, she reached up behind, grabbing hold of the spike. She pulled it with all of her might to remove it. She reached up with her tail to help pull the wooden spike out. With every inch it moved caused her great agony. She roared in pain as the spike slid out of her back. Finally out, it fell to the ground. Lillian looked down to her wound. The hole was massive, and her blood flowed freely out. It wouldn't be enough to stop her, though. She placed a hand to her wound and walked slowly forward, still on her hind legs. Every step toward Andre was excruciating, but the devil himself would not stop her from killing this human today. Andre stepped back in shock.
She should be dead by now,
he thought. Andre retreated until he found himself stopped by a giant tree against his back. He saw her coming closer and closer. Lillian could feel her head become light, vision fading. She was almost to him when the sight of him became black. Mere feet away, her eyes started to close and stepped slow. Finally, the beast fell, her head inches from his feet. Andre exhaled a deep sigh of relief. Lillian's body started to change. Her frame began to shrink, her muzzle returned to its normal size, and the rest of her features returned. Andre saw this and peered at the dragoness. One of his men came running to him. "Captain Andre, sir, are you all right?" he asked.
I'm fine, fool. No thanks to you, coward.
He shot back.
Bring the horses around, and the wagon. Tie this bitch to it. and make sure she cannot move. Shackle her with the chains as well.
But, sir, you killed her. Shouldn't we leave her here for the buzzards? The guard asked.
You daft moron. She isn't dead. Her wounds have already begun to heal. This is obviously an elite dragoness. They can survive much more than the peons can.
From back of the clearing, another archer called forth. Captain Andre, Park is still alive. Andre laughed.
Good gods! Bring the traitor and tie him down next to his devil wife. I will bring them before the king myself. Perhaps I will be made a knight this day.
The guards dragged Park's unconscious body to the wagon and tossed him down next to Lillian's. The ropes tightened around him and the horses were latched to the wagon. As the guards started back with their prisoners to the castle, Andre mounted back on his horse. He looked down upon the scene. He thought about what he saw with the two interspecies lovers. He spat upon the ground in disgust. What would bring a warrior of such greatness to do such a thing? Andre started his horse back to the castle.
Park, you bastard. Instead of killing the dragons, you decided to fuck one.
He looked back to the scene of what had happened. Many guards were dead and in pieces. Not caring to tend to them, he pressed on. The journey back took a day, but Andre and his guards had arrived. At the castle gates, Andre yelled up for the gate guard to open. The gate came down, and all made their way inside. A squire ran up to take control of Andre's horse, but Andre shoved him back with his foot.
Get away, boy! Make yourself useful and alert the general of my return. I will be needing an audience with the king this day.
The squire ran off. Andre stepped down from his horse and walked to the wagon. He grabbed the blanket that had been thrown over the pair. They had been covered in order not to alert any townsfolk. So many had pressed the king with their protest to end the war, and he had listened to them. But if they saw Andre walking in with a dragon, no doubt would suspicions be raised. He checked Park, still alive. He looked over the dragon. Her wound had closed up and looked more like a major gash than a gaping hole anymore. Andre took a flask of water hanging from his belt and drank. With some still in his mouth, he spit it on Lillian's face. "This had better be good, Captain." A voice approached. It was the general. Having been woken up in the middle of the night, he was sure something was important, or else somebody would be flogged publicly. Andre stood at attention to the general.
Sir, I have a grave situation to report.
The general approached the wagon and shot a look inside. His eyes widened and his mouth hung open. "Andre, what in the hell is this?" Andre approached the general's side.
General, I have discovered that Park has not been attending to any relative. He has been conspiring with the enemy. After taking the post within the castle, he was feeding information to the dragons.
He lied.
Park had been planning on leaving before the dragons struck the castle itself. I followed him to his meeting place with the dragons, and I captured him and his confederate.
The general looked up at Andre with concern. "Captain, are you sure of this? Because if what you say is true, then this so-called peace was to have been merely a diversion to catch us off guard." Andre straightened up.
I am sure of it, General.
"Very well, then. Good work, Captain. I will report this to the king immediately. In the meantime, have these two placed in the holding cells," replied the general. The general turned quickly and made his way back to the main hall. Andre watched him leave. An evil smile took his lips. Now he could see the whelp and his precious dragon die along with the rest of the devils. And for that, he would be made a hero. He took one last look to the pair.
You heard the General. Take these two and place them in the cells.
The guards responded and rushed to bring them to the holding cells. Andre walked to the dining halls. After everything today, he agreed that he would need a drink.